I know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio. Flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Night Watchers, Rutgers faithful, welcome to another episode of Night Watch with your host, Larry K. This episode is going to be a review, a season in review of the Rutgers football team. I think it's warranted to just kind of retrace some of the games, some of the highlights, some of the good, some of the bad, some of the standout players, some of the disappointments, etc. Just so you know, this coming Tuesday at 8, there will be a live show on Night Watch, joining a sister station with the College Huddle, previewing the bowl matchup with Kansas State, with Joey Wenberg, who will be here to talk about the game and what K-State brings to the table versus Rutgers. So make sure you tune into that. And remember, next Thursday, the 19th, there is a Rutgers holiday party at Beach House Brewery in Belmar. Eric LeGrand will be there, so I'm told. And we will be having a good time. I should be there. Hopefully, that will be confirmed again in the next couple days. So if you want to come out, hang out with me, come out to Beach House Brewery. But before we get into the season in review, I just wanted to touch base. We did have a couple transfers, some commitments from the transfer portal. This is what's happening this year. Agents want to get guys into schools. Schools want to get guys in. They want to sign transfers up. They want to get past it, and they want to move along. The transfer portal has dragged out in certain years. I think teams are anxious to kind of figure out who's going to be around and to sign them and to start planning for next year with the knowledge of who they have to work with. And so we've landed a couple transfers as of today. Douglas Blue Eli, a defensive tackle who has 1 year of eligibility left, started at junior college, then he went to TCU. He wound up transferring to South Florida, ultimately spent a few years at South Florida. He's a run stopper, some decent stats in terms of solo tackles, assisted tackles, had an interception, so he has some athleticism there. Couple tackles for losses, not necessarily any kind of stats that jump out like, wow, this is guy's gonna come in and be an immediate, difference maker for us. But with a position that certainly needs help, he's a solid piece, an experienced piece, a lot of upside to him, definitely a run stuffer, and I think it's going to be beneficial for the team to get as much depth and as many guys along that defensive line as they can. And so bringing him in, he's a Jersey native from Paulsboro, happy to be back in Jersey. So getting some of these guys who are sort of journeymen, whether they initially don't want to come to Rutgers or where initially Rutgers doesn't recruit them or whatever the situation is, when they go out into the world and they develop into good players or, decent players, now that we have the transfer portal, it's nice to bring some of these guys home. It'll be a good addition, I think, to our defensive line group, who, let's face it, has been kind of a work in progress and who is always, hunting for size and ability there to clog some lanes. I think Blue Eli is the kind of player that can do that. And I think he's got the potential to have some impact plays for Rutgers next year. So that's a welcome addition. In addition, C.J. Campbell Jr., another transfer from Florida Atlantic University, committed to the Scarlet Knights. As I understand it, I know we have a lot of talent back there, right? You have Benjamin. You have Raymond. We are really unsure about Sam Brown. I think there's a lot of speculation. This is a couple really rough injuries for him. No one's speaking for him, but we're not sure where that's going to really go. So you bring in a guy like Campbell. He's a real receiving threat out of the backfield. He apparently fits a lot of what Kirk Ciarrocca wants to do. And so it's another addition to the running back room, as you saw this year, right? You can never have too many running backs. And you never know when you're going to need them. And when you kind of run by committee, Kyle Monungai obviously moving on, he was such an essential linchpin to this offense. And you saw when he wasn't able to play or when he needed a breather, when you could kind of platoon that position, it was good for Rutgers. So being able to platoon that position is good, and now Rutgers brings in another guy to bolster that position. So, depending what happens with Sam Brown, even with the younger guys coming up, you're getting yourself an experienced player who fits what Kirk Ciarrocca wants to do, who's a threat, a multifaceted threat out of the backfield. That's obviously going to help Ethan Kaliakmanis do his job. And so, hopefully with the experience and the abilities in the pass game, he'll also be able to do some defending back there as far as blitz pickup. And so you like to grab a guy in the transfer portal like that. Rutgers hitting the ground running in the transfer portal. Obviously, Wesley Bailey moving on. And we're going to see if anybody else enters the portal. We're going to see who else Rutgers goes after. There's a few more targets on their board. When and if we get them, obviously tune in here. I will make some remarks about that. The real go-to guys in that subject, obviously, over at the Knight Report and Anderson and these guys who really delve into those things. So check those guys out as well. And let's talk about this Rutgers football season. Let's go through the games first. And let's talk, we can talk about my prediction for this season, right? Coming into this season, Rutgers had what I thought and what many thought was an advantageous schedule, right? Rutgers had a schedule where almost no team on it coming into the season was impossible to beat, right? There were even some questions about USC, although I penned USC as a loss. Just traveling out there, the talent that's on that program, I thought it was going to be hard for Rutgers to win that. But aside from that game, coming into the season, I really don't think there was any particular game that I thought Rutgers could not win. That's one part of it. The other part of it was that the way the bye weeks lined up and the travel schedules lined up for us and other teams, the schedule seemed really advantageous, with the matchups we were going to get, when we were going to get them, how much rest and prep time we were going to have to go up against these teams. And then you had the third part, all of these returning starters who were not just decent for what Rutgers is. And I know there was a lot of talk about that when things started to go south a little bit mid-season with this team. Well, we really never had the talent to really expect much. It's not really true. The guys that were returning at the time were not only good for Rutgers, but they were impact players who had made, done things for us in conference last season that were returning. And so it boded well with an upgraded quarterback, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And all these other things, there was a lot of potential for Rutgers this season. I penned Rutgers at a 9-3 record preseason. I thought there was a good chance they could get to 9-3. Some people were over the moon saying, they thought Rutgers could get to 10 wins, football, college football playoff, dark horses, all these things. I thought that was a little bit of a stretch, just given where Rutgers has been, the talent on the roster, in general. I wasn't expecting 10 wins. I thought it was the ceiling, though. I thought 10 wins could be the ceiling for this team. But I thought the floor for this team, because there were so many toss-up games, I thought the floor for this team, and I said this on Buckeye Boggs, the OHIO podcast preseason, I said, there's a chance that the team goes 5-7. Because if you look at all the games that are toss-ups, if they win every single one of them and surprise in another one or another two, they're gonna go 10-2. And if they falter and don't win any of the toss-up games, they're going to go 5-7. So Rutgers winds up at 7-5, a respectable result, certainly with all the injuries that occurred, with the way the midseason went to come back out of the bye and do what they did. 7-5 is a respectable season. It's one game better than last year. It's a step forward for the program, certainly. Could it have been 8 wins or 9 wins? We're going to talk about that. But from where I'm sitting, it's not like 7-5 is some above and beyond accomplishment because Rutgers really never had much of a chance at 8 or 9 wins. I think when you look at the way the season went and how we lost some of the games, Rutgers very realistically could have gotten to 9 wins, even with the injuries. And so 7 is a respectable result, but I think it's a little bit under what could have been for this program. I think when you take the injuries into consideration, 7-5 looks better than it would have had there been no injuries. Like if we went into the season with all the expectations, nobody got hurt, and we still wound up 7-5. I think it would have been a real disappointment. But with the injuries, it's a respectable result. However, I still think more could have been accomplished, and the injuries are disappointing because it's bad luck. Some of the bad luck we had is disappointing, and then some of the loss we had is disappointing. This season is not an overall huge disappointment, but I think when you look at it, it's encouraging because you see where we wound up is not really our ceiling, because if a few things had swung the other way, we could have had a much different bowl game, a much different season, a much different outlook. On the other hand, it can be disappointing because you say, wow, this season could have been like borderline storybook season, borderline pinnacle part 1 of Greg Point 2. I know that sounds pretty crazy, but think about it, And it turned out to be another incremental step forward. We're happy about it. Schedule gets tougher next year. We lose a lot of these leaders, but it is what it is. And let's go through it a little bit. So before the season even starts, first of all, we're coming off a bowl victory in the Pinstripe Bowl against Miami, 31-24, where we lined up as a Big Ten team, and I think really helmet on helmet, as we have done to ACC teams, we really wound up taking it to Miami good enough to kind of win that game outright without any kind of flukes, without any kind of craziness. Yeah, some of their guys sat, but we were able to just line up and win that game against an ACC team, an old Big East foe who really had our number, a name program who had a really good season this year, mind you. And we come off that win, and it seemed like every guy that you wanted to come back last year, just guy after guy is saying, I'm coming back, and Kyle's coming back, and this one's coming back. And and then you get the quarterback transfer, which a lot of discussion as to whether or not, that was going to be a huge upgrade. It turned out to be a huge upgrade. You had a lot of younger guys that you were excited about. Ian Strong, who obviously lived up to the hype this year. And then you had all these returning guys, and you're really geared up for the season the way the schedule is, and you're thinking, wow, this is really set up perfectly for Rutgers. The week before the start of the season, from practice, you get devastating news. Devastating news that Mo Toure is out for the year. And I remember the press conference, Greg Schiano, the way his demeanor was, the way he made that announcement that Mo Toure was not going to be with the team this year. You could tell that was such an integral piece of that defense and such a cultural piece of that team and that chemistry that Greg, who really tries his best to remain stoic, really, really struggled, to hold it in. And you could tell he was genuinely disappointed, but that, hey, football moves on, life moves on. There was a lot of speculation at the time that Jabome, that Moses Walker were going to be able to relatively easily step into, not easily, but no one said that Mo Toure's shoes could be filled. But there was a lot of optimism that with the depth we had at the position, that the drop-off wouldn't be as impactful or pivotal as some feared. But you also had Tyreen Powell coming off injuries, and that was another thing. Last year against Ohio State, he goes down. I think that's a big reason why Ohio State was able to have their running back get out into the open field and turn that game, where I thought that was a very close game early on, and there was a real chance even after the interception return for the touchdown. We led a touchdown drive, and then you have Powell out, and there's a miscue, and Ohio State kind of blows the game open. He hurts himself again in the offseason. So while you have depth at the linebacker position, when Toure goes out, now you have questions because you don't have Powell either. And even though Powell's coming back at some point, and most speculated, including me, that we wouldn't see Powell until Virginia Tech, that wound up being true. But I don't know that you saw the healthy or even 80% Tyreen Powell until much later in the year, really the last month. So you're going into the season already with a huge injury that occurs. And it's going to impact your season. But there's still a lot of optimism around the program. So you go in, you host Howard August 29th. If I recall, it was actually kind of a nice day. It wasn't too hot. Usually that gets crazy hot. It was not too hot that day. Ethan Kaliakmanis goes 15 of 24 147 yards, 3 touchdowns, and you're feeling good about things. Kyle goes off for 165 yards. It's Howard. It is what it is. One thing you notice going up against Howard is that Scroggins, the quarterback of Howard, throws for 116 yards. He has an interception, but he runs for 67 yards, averaging 5.6 a carry. And you're starting to sit there and say, that doesn't look so good. Do we have an issue with mobile quarterbacks who can get out of the pocket and kind of be playmakers? And we kind of put that win 44-7 away, and it's the win, the kind of great band play by Howard, fun all around time. But you start to think, is there something to this defensive issue where this quarterback was able to get out and do what he did? You go up against Akron the next week. Akron visits, and this is where Athan throws kind of an ill-advised interception. He still has 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 14-23 for 230 yards. This is when you saw KJ Duff come out with a touchdown, a pass that I really thought was not the best pass from Athan, kind of deflects off him, and Duff catches it for the touchdown. And that's when you start to see, wow, Duff has an eye and a nose for the ball. He looks like the kind of receiver who can, some receivers wait for the ball to come to them. Some receivers go out and attack the ball. And I think we saw towards the end of this season that both Strong and Duff were able to really be those attackers. He winds up with a touchdown in a play like that, and that bodes well for the rest of the season, even though it was kind of an ill-advised throw by Athan. Long gets a bomb touchdown, which was welcome to see. And Long ultimately started off the season with a lot of promise, but really struggled to grab contested balls. Had some other struggles in there. And after the second bye week, when we switched receivers, I thought we really saw an uptick in production. But early in the season, it was nice to see Long get out there and contribute. And I think one of the most promising things about the Long bomb in that game against Akron was you got to see that Athan Kaliakmanis has a really nice deep ball, and when a guy gets open and behind the defense, Athan Kaliakmanis is going to be able to do what you need him to do, which is something we've been missing for a very long time. So the following week, we go out to Virginia Tech, a place where we really haven't won, a team that has had our number by and large a lot of the time, and we go out there and we escape with a 26-23 victory. The first half we really dominated. It was 16-7 in the first half, and Rutgers really looked defensively and offensively like they were outmatching Va-Tech at that time. Even though it was on the road and Va-Tech had some talent on their team, including Drones, their quarterback, it just looked like Rutgers had their number. And you had Felton, you had some talented wideouts on the team, you had some talented players, but Rutgers was dominating. Really until the second half, where we come out, we get a touchdown in the third quarter, and then kind of all hell breaks loose. Virginia Tech starts looking like they're moving downhill on offense nonstop. There were a few errant decisions, I thought, in that game where we elected to go for it, where we should have kicked the field goal. We were within range for Jay Patel to kick a field goal early in that game, and we decided to instead go for a fourth down, which we didn't get. That energized Va-Tech. And I think later we tried to kick a 50-plus yard field goal where maybe we should have gone for that or punted that. And now Patel misses it. And now you have a situation where maybe his confidence is a little bit up in the air. Va-Tech is feeling pretty bullish on the situation. They start going downhill. Things are really starting to work out for them at that point. And then late in the game, you have to get a stop on Va-Tech because it seems like the momentum is completely changed. They're at home. It seems like they can't miss. They can't mess up. They get 2-point conversions like nothing. And they have the ball once again, and it's time for them to once again drive down the field. And it feels like, honestly, I was at my buddy's house down the shore, and I'm sitting there, and I'm sitting there looking at him, and he's looking at me like we were hanging out. We were talking about his new house and how he's decorating it, and his son's playing behind us, and we're eating hors d'oeuvres, and where everything's fine. All of a sudden, we're like in a dog fight, and we're like, what's going on? How'd we wind up in a dog fight? And we're looking at each other when Vatek gets the ball like, there's no chance we're going to stop him. But our playmakers do show up and do show out. Longer Bream with a brilliant interception, followed by an excellent call by Kirk Shiraka. A screenplay gets the ball in Ian Strong's hands. I believe it was Ian Strong. And remember, I'm riffing a lot of this off-season memory, so in the comments, let me know if I messed anything up. I'll correct it. I'll put a little addendum down there. But beautiful screen pass, gets us down there, gets us into field goal range. We're able to kick that game-winning field goal, and we're able to escape Vatek with a victory, start the season 3-0. And that's what everybody really wanted, right? Many people thought we'd have trouble in Virginia and thought we'd have trouble going against Vatek on the road and that might be our first loss. But everybody hoped that we would be able to beat Vatek because the home showdown against brand new Big Ten member Washington, a team that had beaten us in the past, a team that was the national runner-up last year, a different team than last year, but nonetheless a brand that people recognized, a newcomer to the Big Ten, a West Coast team, was coming to Piscataway, and we had a night game, and we wanted that showdown to mean something. And sure enough, the Scarlet Knights took care of business. We come home 3-0 for a showdown with Washington under the lights. There were drone shows. There were are you from North Jersey? Stand up. South Jersey? Do you believe in Central Jersey? Are you from Central Jersey? And the game day production was excellent front to back. You got to give hats off to the coaching staff, Crociano, to the production staff, the support staff, everybody involved. That was everything you wanted it to be. Rutgers wins that game 21-18. Really an interesting game in a lot of ways. Washington blocks a field goal, and as they're celebrating, a freshman runs onto the field before the play's dead. They get a penalty. It's almost an unheard of penalty, unsportsmanlike. That, I was surprised that it reversed the play. I thought maybe it would be unsportsmanlike added on to the end of the play, allowing the block to have occurred, because that's a pivotal point in the game. But that's not how the rule is. We get the ball. We get the penalty yards. And the very next play, Ethan Kalik-Manis is able to connect to Ian Strong on a touchdown pass. And that kind of sets the momentum for us. We really, in that game, sometimes on offense we struggled. Other times on defense we struggled. And Washington marched down the field and just was unable to convert. They weren't able to. They missed a field goal. They couldn't punch it in. They went for it and couldn't get it. And so Rutgers was able, when it mattered, in front of the home crowd, when it mattered, Rutgers was able to stand up, bow up, and prevent Washington from converting. And on the other side, when Rutgers got its opportunities, Rutgers was able to convert. They had 3 touchdowns, 21-18, old school football score on Rutgers' side, 21 points, 3 touchdowns, just able to do what they had to do. Sam Brown with a really tough run, if you remember, breaks away, runs through another defender, just powers through and goes in for the end zone. And I think a lot of people, and no matter what happens with Sam Brown, I think a lot of people are going to remember that. It's going to be an awesome thing, and it was an awesome game and an awesome time for Rutgers. Rutgers was fortuitous in that game, and that plays into a few different things you can talk about with the season, but Rutgers was fortuitous there. And so, when you're not fortuitous on the other side and you lose some, maybe you trade it off with that win. But in a lot of ways, kind of outplayed Rutgers. I mean, they beat us for total yards, 521 to 299. Passing yards, 314, 115. 207 rushing yards to our 184. There were a lot of areas where Washington outplayed us, but we came out with the win at home. It was against Nebraska. A lot of people, including me, thought this would be the first loss for Rutgers. You're on the road. Nebraska has a talented young quarterback. Nebraska is on, the upswing. Matt Rule's down there. He's doing what he's supposed to do. The defensive line is extremely formidable, and that plays exactly against our hand, which is to feed the rock to Kyle Monungai. And at this point in the season, Rutgers still saw itself and was playing like a run-first old-school team that relied on its defense and relied on its running game and had its quarterback open up to make throws only really to complement the running game. And Rutgers, we weren't fielding punts most of the time. And I'm not just talking about returning punts. We weren't fielding punts, meaning Dremel wasn't even allowed to field the punt a lot of the time. He had to let it go. So even if he fields a punt and he gets it right where it lands, he might save 20 yards because the ball was hitting, say, at the 30 and rolling to the 10, and he wasn't even allowed to feel it. We were playing extremely conservative at that time, at that part of the season. And so far, it was working. Little fortuitous against Washington, but we started the season 4-0. It's right where we want to be. Only 2 games from bowl eligibility. Right on track, beyond on track, maybe to get to the season goal we wanted to. And so we continued that conservative mindset and conservative way of playing. We go out to Nebraska, and Nebraska's defensive line really stifled the Scarlet Knights. Really stifled the Scarlet Knights in a big way. And I think there were a lot of reasons for that, but really stifled us. And we only were able to score 7 points. There was a punt block. We get all the way down to the 2-yard line. We were unable to punch it in, even though we tried 4 times, unable to punch it in. Kyle Monungai, a lot of people thought he got across. It was inconclusive ultimately. There was some speculation as to why didn't Greg Schiano call a timeout and force the officiating crew and the brain trusts in Chicago to take another look at it and see what happened. But it doesn't happen. He accepts the answer, and they move right along. And Rutgers does not win that game. Nebraska at that point moves to 5-1. Rutgers is 4-1. Nebraska 14-7 with the victory. And what I think is most disappointing about that loss, Raiola, the freshman phenom quarterback, everybody who I spoke to had said, look, if you can shut down Raiola, there's a good chance you win this game because the entire offense really runs through him, and he's only a freshman. And Rutgers, to their credit, really kind of made Raiola look like a freshman for a lot of that game. He throws an interception. He doesn't do much through the air. 13 of 27 for 134 yards, 1 interception. Only gets 14 points on the board at home. But Rutgers' utter lack of ability to run the ball or create anything offensively is the reason that they faltered. And it was interesting because Kyle Monungai had 19 carries for 78 yards. So he was kind of running the ball effectively for a time, and then they kind of took it out of his hands. And they're throwing the ball all over the field. And at the end of the day, Ethan Kaliakmanis wound up under 50% completion percentage, 15 of 37 for 186 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. And that was really the story. I don't know why we didn't rely more. We said we were a running team, but we didn't rely much on it. And the defensive line of Nebraska, I know it stifled Kyle when they really hunkered down, but it created a lot of problems and we were unable to do much. So you take that as a loss. It's on the road. You think Nebraska is going to be very good. You think, it's the first loss. You're 4-1. Things are still on track. You come home to play a Wisconsin team that many thought for the first time in a very long time, and certainly the first time since Rutgers has entered the Big Ten, you thought that Wisconsin was vulnerable. And I was on with Rajiv from the Bucky Report that week. We're talking about the game, and he's worried about Wisconsin. And if you ultimately trace the season, Wisconsin does not have a good year, fires their offensive coordinator in season, Longo. They're not the Wisconsin of old. There's a lot of people not happy with them. And yet they come in to Piscataway and they ultimately and just undoubtedly dominate the Scarlet Knights. 42-7, 549 yards to 271 yards. Rutgers just problems all over the field, problems defending yards after the catch, problems moving the football. Callie McManus goes 12 of 32. Again, well under 50%. No touchdowns, 1 interception. Kyle Monungai takes him 19 carries to get to 72 yards. Does have a touchdown. Receivers are held with absolutely no touchdowns. And we had some trouble on the offensive line. It really started to rear itself after that Nebraska game. And as this is all going on, you're having problems. And Sam Brown goes down in this game. And it's at the end of the game in garbage time. And I really think that game, when we go down 42-7, and we really just get pummeled by an old rival, and pummeled by a team that we really thought this year we would actually have a chance to compete with. But they almost put us in our place to the point that you started to question whether any of this was fool's gold going into the year. You started to question, if you were a Rutgers fan at that time, were we overhyped? And fellow fans are even gaslighting you. You know, I don't know why you expected anything. Rutgers is just not good. They just don't have the players. They're just not what you thought they were. They are not so good at all. They can't beat Wisconsin. They're not even on the same stratosphere as Wisconsin. And that day, for the first time all year, I think people really started to realize that it wasn't just a fluke in Nebraska. We are not on schedule like we thought we were. I thought we would win one of Wisconsin and Nebraska, and we lost both. And now you're 4-2. And it's not a terrible record by any stretch, and you still have plenty of opportunities. But I think at that moment, not because of the loss itself, because you're sitting at 4-2, but because of how badly we were beaten by a team that was vulnerable this year by many metrics, you started to feel like maybe the hopes and aspirations we had for this year are simply not going to come to fruition, because if Wisconsin can dominate us that much, how much of a chance do we really have to get where we want to go? But there was a lot of talk, and including me, and after about a couple days, Tuesday or Wednesday that week, we pick ourselves up and we think, well, UCLA has had a brutal travel schedule. They're not playing good at all. They're really not a good team. They have to travel once again from west to east. It's a noon kickoff. It's 9 a.m. for them. There's no way that UCLA is going to beat us. We got to get things right against UCLA. And we go into that game. And Nathan Kaliakmanis is 18 of 30. Again, no touchdowns, 1 interception, 287 yards. But Kyle Monungai, again, on 19 carries, 106 yards, 3 touchdowns. Ethan has a rushing touchdown. So we get our points. Game starts off first quarter, each have a touchdown. But the second quarter, things start to get away from us. And one of the things that happened was Garbers, the quarterback for UCLA, who had talent, who was a player that could make things happen if things went his way, especially if he wasn't pressured and he had time to deliver the ball and he got the ball where he wanted it to go within the confines of their offensive design. He was hitting guys in stride, and guys were making Rutgers pay. There was just too much athleticism, too much talent on the perimeter, and it had been happening for several of our losses. But it really started to become evident that we were really missing a healthy Tyreen Powell. We had a Tyreen Powell, but a healthy one. And Mo Toure, in that our linebacking core at times really looked lost. Moses Walker sometimes didn't seem like he knew where he needed to be. Jabome had a nice start to the season, but looked like he was having some growing pains. And it just seemed like our cornerback depth, which was also being tested, and Igbinosun at that safety hybrid, position was struggling. And you really were looking at a team that looked like athletically on defense, they couldn't keep up with teams who had perimeter playmakers that were going to make you pay. And UCLA Garbers went 32 of 38 for 383 yards and 4 touchdowns. And it looked like, whereas against Nebraska, it looked like the defense held its own pretty well, but the offense couldn't do anything. UCLA made it look like, well, the offense is somewhat formidable, but the defense absolutely has no prayer at stopping anybody. Rutgers loses 35-32, and Rutgers drops to 4-3. And if I'm correct, I believe that's the game. Don't quote me, but I believe that's the game where Schiano was saying, hey, shoot your shot now. You don't believe in this team? You don't think we're going to get where I want us to go? Shoot your shot now. Call it. Call your shot now. Call it out now. And guys are calling it out. And I don't think that was a miscalculation by commentators or fans or prognosticators. I think there was a legitimate reason to call Rutgers out at that time. The skid was real. Some of the issues on defense were real. Some of the fact that we didn't seem to have plans for backup players who had to come into the game. You had backup linemen when Felter goes out, and you try Chin in there, and that doesn't seem to work at first. And you have different guys going in there, and they're struggling. They're struggling to get acclimated, and you're starting to wonder, well, if this is a developmental program, where's all the development? Then you go out to USC. I thought early in the game against USC, Rutgers looked somewhat respectable, even though USC kind of ran away with it from the beginning. 14 points in the first quarter to Rutgers 3, another 14 in the second, and they kind of ran away with it. Rutgers never really had a chance in that game. There were some opportunities. It looked like they had some fight. Athan throws a touchdown, 27 of 47, 313 yards. Kyle has 86 yards on the ground. But it still seems as though Rutgers is just a step behind programs like USC. It was on the road. It was in LA. And now the skid is complete, right? The skid is complete. And we move to 4-4 on the season. Win the first 4, lose the second 4, and it's full-blown kind of meltdown mode on the season. Given what we thought we could be, it was meltdown mode. It was, what is this team? Who is this team? I mean, if we're a developmental program and we say the pipeline's finally in place because this is the end of the first iteration of development for Greg Schiano and the guys he brought in, well, where the hell's the development? Because these backups who are coming in, we really don't see much from them. What was the plan? Because, yeah, there's injuries, but you just got pretty much beaten handily 3 weeks in a row. UCLA was a little closer, but 3 weeks in a row you get beaten handily. And what are you doing? So they go into another bye week, and there's a lot of speculation. Will we even win another game? But there's a lot of talk. These last 4 games have always been maybe the most toss-up of the toss-ups, the most winnable, the even more favorable to the team for many of the prognosticators. Some of my colleagues who I was on with, I know Aaron Brightman was more bullish on the end of the season than some of the early and middle of the season, and there were some other people like that. I thought we'd probably drop one of the 4 games. Ultimately was correct, but not with which game I picked. But we have a chance. And a lot of people I know over on the Rutgers Rant podcast, they were saying, hey, you got to come out. And I said this on the RU Review with Steve Tishner. I said, hey, Minnesota is a good team. Maybe the best of the 4. I don't think it turned out that way, but maybe the best of the 4. But we can match up against Minnesota pretty well. I like the way we match up against Minnesota. I think we can win it. And I think in order to put a winning streak together in these last 4 games, you got to start by beating Minnesota. Because if you drop to Minnesota after the bye week, after you had time to prepare, after the 4-game losing streak, now it's 5-game losing streak, I think there's a legitimate question as to whether the team loses all confidence and it really starts to collapse. And sure enough, Rutgers comes out 26-19. Awesome game in so many ways, and this is where I think you really saw the breakout. You changed the offense, you changed the defense. Athan Kaliakmanis, 17 of 33 for 240 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. You didn't have Kyle that game either, which is even more impressive, which is part of the reason I think the team had to start changing and innovating and opening up. You couldn't just go into that shell anymore and just feed the ball to your star running back and just hope not to make any mistakes. You had to take some kind of chance. And Rutgers all of a sudden is using Strong in these innovative ways and getting the ball to Dymere Miller further down the field and opening the whole thing up and running different things and getting in it. Kirk Chiraka's getting in a rhythm. And all of a sudden, Ethan, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Antoine Raymond goes, 22 carries, 73 yards. Benjamin had 66 yards. Benjamin, who the plan was always to redshirt him, so this is the first game he's playing in. We were wondering where he was since he had a good showing last year. All of a sudden, he comes in. There's a tandem in the absence of Kyle. They combine for well over 100 yards. Ian Strong, 4 receptions, 89 yards, a touchdown. KJ Duff coming out party, 3 receptions for 65 yards. Dymere Miller, 5 for 58. And you have a Dremel sighting, 1 for 17. Blake is getting involved. Benjamin's in the passing game. And now Jabome. Jabome has a rebound game, 11 tackles, 2 that he assisted with, a sack. Griffin with a sack. Keontae Hamilton with a sack. Walker with a sack. Guys that were now getting moved around and put in better positions to succeed are out there making impacts on the defensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball. Brosmer, who's a respectable quarterback, 27 of 45, 262 yards, 1 touchdown. That's it. Rushing yards, very few from Minnesota, who's a team that wants to run the ball, couldn't run the ball. 109 rushing yards for Rutgers, 35 for Minnesota. Greg said after the game, Joe Harris-Simiak and Greg, they talked, they stripped it down to the studs, and they completely rebuilt it. And the explanation that Schiano gave at this juncture in the season was that sometimes when there are injuries and you start plugging holes here. Oh, there's an injury there. Plug this guy. Oh, plug that guy. Move that. You don't have time to reflect on what you're building anymore. You're just trying to plug so many holes that before you know it, you're so far off track from where you started. It's like you make one wrong turn, so you try to compensate by making another, and all of a sudden you're way off course. And instead of trying to rectify the wrong turns you already made, you just got to find the way forward that gets you eventually back on course down the road. And what I do think happened, and there is a lot of merit to, is they were so concerned with patching an individual hole here, an individual hole there, that before they knew it, the defense was completely out of whack and out of their control, and it was nothing like they wanted it to be. So in stepping back and playing different guys, giving Jabome a run, really not coming out of the game much, plugging different guys in at safety, giving Sanders more run, giving these other guys more run, putting Walker in there at end, giving him some run, a chance to do things, and creating havoc, especially with the pass rush. And putting different guys in different positions. And then also, I think, having confidence, and we had the safety in that game, and that's Walker. That's a guy who was kind of a project. And now you're seeing the development all of a sudden. And now you're seeing the pipeline all of a sudden. But I think it's partly because the team needed to stop, and I'll get into this again in a minute, needed to stop being in a shell and trying to plug holes, and needed to change its identity and who it was, and really harness the guys that could play, harness the healthy guys, do what they do best, and get on a tear and redeem the season. And that Minnesota game was the first step toward doing that. Rutgers then goes out to Maryland, handily beats Maryland. Maryland came out on fire. Their backs were against the wall. They came out on fire, but Rutgers really did what they had to do, won 31-17. Again, another good game for Ethan, 20 of 30, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dymere Miller, 8 receptions, 107 yards, a touchdown. Ian Strong, another good game, 7 for 86 yards and a touchdown. And again, that complimentary up-and-coming freshman KJ Duff, 3 for 35. Ben Black got involved a little bit, got that monkey off our back and beat Maryland on the road. Maybe it was good that it didn't come the last game of the year like it usually does. Either way, that was a much-needed win. Rutgers now gets 2 games above 500, gets bowl eligible. What better way to do it than against Maryland? Then we come home against Illinois, and everybody knows that story. I'm not going to rehash it too much. Really should have beat Illinois, in my opinion. Illinois was a good team. And that game went back and forth. And I'm sure those percentages, those retro percentages that you could look at, I'm sure that they went back and forth quite a few times. When Illinois scores at the end there on the quarterback keeper, then it looks like Rutgers throws an interception, but it's overturned. Ethan Kaliakmanis just absolutely wills us into the end zone. Kyle Monungai does the work, gets us there to cap it off. And you're thinking, wow, once Illinois is at fourth down, pushed back, and they got to kick a long 50-plus yard field goal in the freezing cold with wind all over the place, you think Rutgers pulled off this victory and the seniors are going to go off for senior day and we're going to win, and we are looking 8 wins straight in the face, which is only one short of what I predicted, and we're about to do what we wanted to do for so long, also beat a ranked team, and just the absolute, not going to rehash it, but the decision that was made. Illinois obviously wins, really rough. We go out to Michigan State in the snow, rough conditions, Big Ten conditions. They score on the first drive, but after that, we really never look back. Absolutely dominate Michigan State and win to end the season 7-5. And look, fun season of ups and downs. I watched that game next to the basketball game at Destination Dogs. Fun experiences for fans. Way up in the air with hope and optimism. Way down in the dumps with this is all lost and where's the program even going? Because if we can't develop guys and we're going to snowball completely into, a 500 season or worse in a season we were supposed to be much better, to all the way, wow, look at the quarterback, look how good he is. Look at the receivers and the development of these young guys and the promise for the future. Just a really crazy season with a ton of ups and downs. But I think the overall thing to talk about with this season is, A, did we take a step forward? And the answer is yes, we did. B, can you have confidence in this program? Because you've seen some development of younger players and now you have really good recruiting classes come in. The answer is yes, you can. And C, did you accomplish some things you really needed to? Did we beat Maryland for the first time in a while? Yes. Did we capitalize on momentum? And finally, in prime time, at home against a conference opponent, get a win when the hype was high? Yes, we did that against Washington. Did we beat a winning team in conference while they were a winning team in Minnesota, who was a formidable, strong team? Yes, we did. And were we able to weather a storm and fight back after some adversity and come back and remain strong and resilient and close out the season the way we wanted to? Yes. Yes. Now, I think the catalyst for this season, I think what really happened this year, and it's important to recognize, is I think Coach Schiano and the staff started off this season with a very certain specific philosophy, which was we have these returning players. We specifically have this returning stud running back. We are going to harness this running back for everything he has to offer us and feed him the ball and play mistake-free football, leave ourselves absolutely no chance to make mistakes. We're not even going to field punts. We're going to plug these holes on defense as best we can, and we're not going to change, and we're going to put our heads down and try to squeak out games with a ball control, mistake-free game plan. And I think it worked the first 4 games, and sometimes, like with Va-Tech and Washington, sometimes it almost didn't work but still came through, which led the coaching staff to keep doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on it. Then I think in the 4-game skid, it really started to get away from us, and those philosophies were unable to keep up with philosophies on the other side that, especially with UCLA, had less to lose and were just able to play free and loose while we were playing tight and trying to go into a turtle shell and not make mistakes. And when the bye week came, it couldn't have come at a better time. And I think part of the process that Schiano and his staff went through in retooling and stripping it down and building it back up was changing their own philosophy. Like, let's see who we have on this team and what is the ceiling. Like, let's shoot for the ceiling. Let's open up the offense and throw to Ian Strong and throw to Dymere Miller and throw to KJ Duff. Let's play those guys in the perimeter. Those guys attack the ball. Let's put them in the game. On defense, let's put some guys who we've developed, who we've had, high hopes for, who we've had in the pipeline. Let's put them in. It's their time to go in. It's their time to shine and to see what they have. No more sense in being in a turtle shell. No more sense in trying not to lose. You're 4-4, your season's on the line, the trajectory and perception of your program's on the line. It's time to open things up and see what we have in some of these young kids. It's time to see what we have in some of these guys. It's time to stop shuffling guys around, just leave the guys that we have the most confidence in the game and let them take their lumps and learn. And it's time to go all in on what we do have. And I think that was the biggest pivotal point in the season. I think once we came out of that bye week, I think we were a different team, not by some magical conundrum that no one can figure out, not by coincidence, but we came out of that bye week playing much higher level because we were playing younger guys with a lot of upside, and we reshuffled it and put our best developed, best potential guys in. We took a gamble on those guys. We let those guys take their shots. We didn't make those guys play tight. We let them play loose. We opened things up, and the rewards paid dividends. Some of the real catalysts for this, obviously, Kyle Monangai, another 1,000-yard season, back-to-back. I believe he's second all-time in Rutgers rushing, 1,279 yards this year. Ethan Kaliakmanis, I think you have to step back and you have to say that Ethan Kaliakmanis was a huge revelation. When there was debate before the season started as to would he be that much of a big upgrade over Gavin Wimsatt, given Gavin Wimsatt's ability to run the football and use his legs, that debate has completely been deaded a long time ago. But looking back, Ethan Kaliakmanis with nearly 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, only a 54.8 completion percentage, but it was enough to get the job done. And that's also with some drops and some games that were worse than others with the drops. But even figuring that percentage in, 17 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, almost 2,500 yards, especially, throughout the entire season in any of our wins, he came through when you needed him. But that last stretch when they put guys on the perimeter that really attacked the ball and gave him an ability to just air the ball out and get it there, I think there was a huge change in the team. And I think putting the ball in his hands complemented Kyle Monangai's abilities, and Kyle Monangai's abilities opened things up for Ethan. And when they fully allowed him to just fly and be himself, I think it was just an awesome thing to see, and it bodes really well going into next year because now he's a senior quarterback. You know who he is. Hopefully all these talented pieces are coming back. I know Kyle's not. A lot of the offensive line, Holland Pierce, another just an excellent season by Holland Pierce, by the way. Let's just keep it 100. The guy was phenomenal this year. Very few sacks or anything else allowed. Just an absolute anchor on the left side of that line. That's going to be the hardest thing to replace next year. Holland Pierce, you wish him well. You know he's going to the league. You know he's going to get a shot. You can't wait to see what he becomes. Awesome story with Holland Pierce, by the way. But you have to replace him, and you really don't have to replace anybody else along that offensive line, hopefully. So you have Ethan coming back another year. I think maybe one of the best things that could have happened, ironically, was going through some of that adversity so that you could open up your philosophy, open up your minds, put some of these wide receivers, put some of these young guys in positions to succeed and get them to where you want them to go. I think that was the biggest catalyst for the change in the season. I will say that my prediction 9-3 was not off because looking at that Illinois game that you really should have won, that gets you to 8 wins. And then really all you had to do was find one more win, and you get to 9 wins. And there were plenty of games we could have won. The only 2 games you really could say we really had no chance were Wisconsin and USC, and that's in hindsight. Going into the season, you might have had a chance against Wisconsin, but even though Wisconsin didn't wind up so great, I still think, it was a bad day for Rutgers. So I'm not saying they should have beat Wisconsin, but they could have beaten Nebraska, at least one of Nebraska or Illinois or UCLA. You win one of those games, and you got 8 wins. You win 2 of them, and you got 9 wins. So that wasn't a far-off prediction by any means. It was within reach. So it wasn't an unrealistic thing. Now, it didn't happen. And you can say that the Washington game canceled it out because that was fortuitous in our direction, so you can't win every toss-up. Fair enough point. But it was within reach, and that's a good thing. But the schedule gets harder going forward. It's not going to be the same. You're not going to have Kyle. You're not going to have Holland Pierce. You're not going to have Aaron Lewis. You're not going to have West. Not that it was, some of these guys. You're not going to have Shaquan Loyal. Some of these key senior role players you're not going to have anymore. So that is obviously something to consider. But, I think all in all, once you opened it up, it was a good season. And you had a winning record. You're going to a bowl game. You got a ton of things crossed off your list. It would have been nice to beat Illinois, get to that winning Big Ten record and high up in the Big Ten standings, and maybe get to that Citrus Bowl or something and, cross that off your list, beat a ranked team. But other than that, you did beat Maryland, check. You beat a winning conference team, check. You beat a conference team in prime time at home for a night game to get the fans excited, check. You had a winning season, check. You had a good quarterback. Check. You look like a Big Ten offense. Check. You have young guys in the pipeline. You're showing you could develop them. Check. I mean, a lot of things checked off. So you got to be happy if you're a Rutgers fan going into this bowl. I think bowls do mean something. I'm excited for any bowl. It's just another thing to add to the trophy case, another accolade for the player, another way to cap off a memorable season, because at the end of the day, man, not everybody could win a Super Bowl or a national championship, but you have to chronicle your life and put chapters in your life that matter to you. And for these young men who play for this school, I think capping off a season with a bowl game encapsulates that season in a memorable way and does it right. So I'm glad for these guys going. Another addition, where we've struggled in some places in the transfer portal, one of the places that I think this staff in particular has done very well is wide receiver. Dymere Miller was the leading receiver in yardage on the team this year, 731 receiving yards. Just in second place on touchdowns, Ian Strong took the title with 5 touchdowns. He's been an absolute revelation. Him and his buddy, KJ Duff, both from Long Island, came out and really left their impact this year. If we can keep those guys going forward for a few more years, I think they are going to be an excellent wide receiver tandem, one of the best we've seen in years, probably the best we've seen in at least a decade. So that is really encouraging too. We'll see who winds up in the slot. Is it Ben Black? Who is it? But a lot to like, a lot to reflect on. I hope you enjoyed the trip down memory lane, game in and game out. Let me know in the comments if you want to see, a different type of postseason analysis. I thought it would be cool to just go in and out of the games, relive it with me, and then discuss some of the reasons that I think things, got better or worse or what happened. I think a big thing this season was the coach's ability to self-reflect and adjust on the fly in season. I'm still critical of some of the ways that, we started the season. I'm still critical of some of the things that happened mid-season. I still think we could have done better. I still think that it was right within our grasp, and it sucks that we weren't able to reach what was within our grasp. But I think that if I'm being critical, I've also got to hand out positives. And one of the positives is that the coaching staff was able to self-criticize, self-reflect, and in the middle of the season, look at what was working, look at what wasn't working, make those adjustments, and then finish the season strong. And I think you want a staff, you want a culture that does that, players that are resilient, a coaching staff that is self-critical, that can figure things out on the fly. I think the catalyst was the self-reflection. I think that is not only going to be a catalyst to end this season well, but a catalyst going forward where this program is more willing, I think more like Shiano 1.0, to embrace challenges and just take a swing for the fences sometimes and go with the guys you have and their strengths and see what they can do, and it can end well. Guys, if you have not done so, but you watched this whole video, you took this journey with me, I know you've seen my face once or twice or 3 times or more pop up on your feed, and you've clicked it and you've listened to me because you're a Rutgers fan. Just like me, a dyed-in-the-wool Rutgers alum and fan. Got my red tie on today. Click that subscribe button. I'm asking you to show some love to a fellow Rutgers diehard. Please click that subscribe button. We are fighting to get to 1,000 subscribers. That gives the channel so much more support. We really appreciate you. Make sure you share this channel with other people, your family, your friends. Share this video with them. Again, still looking for sponsorship, so anybody interested in that, let us know. But click subscribe. It's right here. Can we get 20 more subscribers from this video? It would be awesome. If you've made it through the journey with me, before you close the window, just click that subscribe button just to show some support, show some love. Let me know you're out there. comment about what you thought about it. I'll be back with you for more basketball talk. We're going to talk about the bowl game with the K-State guys. We have a lot more on the horizon. We're going to talk about the final roster. We're going to continue to have content for you. So hit the subscribe button. Every subscriber gives me more time and ability to give more content. So if you like the way the channel's going, click subscribe. But thank you to all the subscribers and listeners we've already had. We've grown a ton this season. It's all because of you guys caring about Rutgers, tuning into Rutgers content and giving me a chance to speak to you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity you've given me to talk to you and for your support of this platform. There will be other things in the works, including written product coming soon. So stay tuned to Night Watch. Stay tuned to Lawrence Crane, Larry K, who's out here giving you content. Click that subscribe button. Talk to you soon, and go RU.